They call it the toughest job in Washington. Not the presidency, but those who control access to it. The White House Chief of Staff plays a critical role in the success or failure of any administration.
Author Chris Whipple spoke with all 17 living people who've held the title for his new book, The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. And he joins us here this morning. Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
One of the first chiefs of staff we're introduced to in the book is H.R. Bob Haldeman, who many of us remember from Watergate. But he actually really helped define in sort of the modern terms this job, didn't he?
That's the really fascinating thing about Haldeman, and the book is really about fascinating characters from beginning to end. But Haldeman among the most, because he was, as we all know, sort of the poster boy for Watergate, the biggest scandal in political history.
Yeah.
And yet, the irony is that he created the template for the modern, empowered White House chief. And if you talk to his successors, they will all say, that guy wrote the book. He knew more about how to...
What did he do for Richard Nixon, I mean, essentially?
Well, among other things, what he did was he created time and space for Nixon to think. Mm-hmm. You know, he was the ultimate gatekeeper. He was able to make the trains run on time. He was a gatekeeper. He controlled the flow of information to the president. He executed the president's agenda. And he ran a very tight ship until, of course, it all unraveled rather badly.
Well, I think a lot of people forget that Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld were chiefs of staff under Gerald Ford. How formative was that experience, and how much did it determine the men that they became later?
Well, talk about untold stories and surprising stories. Dick Cheney, as a 34-year-old White House chief of staff to Gerald Ford, was, believe it or not, the most popular guy in town. He was the life of the party.
Wow.
He had a self-effacing manner. He was the guy you wanted in the room when you needed to reach a consensus. His Secret Service code name was Backseat. So it's become a kind of
I'm not going to ask why, but go ahead.
It's become a kind of almost a parlor game among all the chiefs themselves. What in the world happened to Cheney? Yeah. There are a lot of different theories.
You tell a great story about how after Ford lost, Cheney left a broken bike wheel behind with a note.
Well, Gerald Ford had this crazy notion, as it turned out. A lot of presidents have made the same mistake, but Gerald Ford thought he could have 5 or 6 or more senior advisors with equal access to him, coming and going. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, and he called it the spokes of the wheel.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a disaster, and it took Gerald Ford a month to figure that out, and he turned everything around by bringing in, guess who, Don Rumsfeld, to put the White House together. But on Dick Cheney's last day, the spokes of the wheel became such an in-joke. Yeah. Dick Cheney was presented with a mangled bicycle wheel with every spoke broken. He took it, and instead of taking it home and putting it in the garage, he left it on his desk, and he wrote a note to his successor, Ham Jordan, saying, "Dear Ham, beware the spokes of the wheel."
Well, on that note, I have to ask you, given the news this week, there's almost a reported Game of Thrones style power struggle happening inside the Trump White House, featuring his chief of staff, Reince Priebus. How unusual does that seem in the context of what you researched in the book?
It's not unusual. It's happened before, and it's a formula for failure. To have equal access. You know, the notion that governing is very hard. Governing is not like running a real estate firm in Manhattan, and you can't have a bunch of lieutenants at war with each other and somehow expect that that's creative tension. The White House doesn't work that way. The major lesson of the book for me is that every president learns, often the hard way, that you have to empower your chief of staff to be first among equals in the White House so that he can execute your agenda and also tell you what you don't want to hear.
Are there ever going to be any female chiefs of staff?
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure.
At some point.
Why hasn't there been so far, do you think?
Well, how many female presidents have we had?
Yes.
And for that matter, how many female campaign managers have we had? Not many. And I think that'll change. And it almost happened reportedly under Obama. And there was a woman named Nancy Ann DeParle who was behind the health care bill, and she just didn't have the political experience really for the job. She had lots of policy experience.
All right. Chris Whipple, thank you so much. The book is The Gatekeepers, and it is available now.